welcome to another episode of All About That Base, the series where I show you how to make some awesome bases for your miniatures. Now today we're going to be doing a Scorched Woodland base. So the idea of this is that it's an area of woodland that's been ravaged by fire, and all that's left is some smouldering rocks and twigs. Now, I just want to apologise in advance for some of the camera issues during this video. I'm still trying to figure out the best angle to have the camera without it interfering with the painting, but hopefully it won't detract too much from the content. So with that being said, let's head to the table and I'll see you in a bit. So this is the kind of effect that we are going for. We want it to look like a woodland that's been ravaged by fire, and we've just got all of these kind of random scattered charred remains. So there's a tree here that's obviously snapped off, and then there's another one here that's bent over and just, you know, smouldering, and so that's what we're going for. I'm going to do this one on a slightly smaller base. I think that one I've already done was about 60 mils. I think this is a 35 mil. So the first thing we're going to do is prepare the base. Now this is one of my wooden ones that I've just primed black because I just did a batch prime. So we're going to start off by covering the base in some Vallejo white pumice. As some of you might know by now, this is one of my favourite textures. And this is just to make sure that there's no flat parts left on the base, that it's all rough and a bit more natural seeming. So we're just going to spread this over the entire base. And again, this is one of those things where you don't have to be neat. You can just slap it on as much or as little as you want, as long as you make sure that everything is covered. There we go. So we've got this nice rough ground texture now. So one of the things I love about this texture is you can use it as like a cement. So whereas with other materials you might have to wait for them to dry and then super glue on any extra bits, with this, once you've put it on, you can start adding details. So the first thing I'm going to do is I've got some small rocks, some little tiny, I don't even know where I got these from, but they're very handy. So all I'm going to do is just drop a couple of these on randomly, and then just lightly push them in. And when the texture paste dries, it will act a bit like a cement, and it will just hold those in place. So that's those ones. So then I've got this urban mix that I found online. It's just a mixture of tiny bits of sand and different colours and textures. I think there's a few bits of cork in there. So I'm going to sprinkle on a little bit of this as well. And then finally, I'm going to add some of my favourite extra fine granite. Now, obviously, I'm using the products that I have here, and these are some of my favourites to use on bases. But you can literally use whatever you like. If you've got some bits of rock, some bits of cork, just normal sand, absolutely anything goes here, because it doesn't really matter, because once this is all on, it's going to be primed. So doesn't matter what colour anything is that you put on here, because you're not going to see it in the end result. So once you are happy that you've got your texture how you want it, you just need to leave that to dry, and then we will come back and talk about the next step. This has now been left to dry overnight, and as you can see, we've got this nice rough, uneven texture. So now what we're going to do is start to add some of the woodland effects and the branches and the twigs and things like that. So the first thing we're going to add is some tufts. So for this, I would recommend bog standard cheap tufts from eBay. Don't use your Gamer's Grass or your Geek Gaming or Army Painter expensive tufts, because as I said earlier, what colours you put on this don't matter, because everything we're putting on at this point is going to get primed. So don't use your good tufts, just get some nice cheap ones, and then we'll just put a couple of these on. So I've got a big one there, and then this little half one, and we'll stick that down there. So next I've got a bit of dried twig that I just found in the garden, and I left it on a windowsill for a few days, and it dried out and it's gone nice and bristle. So we're going to make some effects with this. So I'm going to snap a bit off. So we've got this nice broken twig here. Now for the bottom, I'm going to take my clippers and cut this off just to try and make it as flat as possible, so we've got a nice surface to glue down. So we take the super glue. So I find that for this purpose, the gel super glue works better, just because normal super glue tends to run everywhere and can make a bit of a mess. This stuff takes a little bit longer to set, but you can be a bit more accurate with it if it ever comes out of the nozzle. There we go. So I'm just going to put a little bit on there, and then find a nice little space for this on the edge and put that there. Now you hopefully shouldn't have to hold it for too long. That should do the trick. So then next, looking back at my original base, I want to do this similar effect to here, where we've got a tree that looks like it's snapped and fallen over. So I'm going to take a slightly longer piece, and again I'm going to trim off the end that I want attached to the base, so we've got a nice smooth end. And then I'm going to find a bit near the bottom and I'm going to snap it gently so that it still stays attached like that. Now this is a bit too long, so I'm going to cut this off at an angle about here, and then just use my fingers to kind of try and make it look a bit rougher. So we've got some bits sticking off. So this is my broken branch. Obviously, when you're designing this, you kind of need to keep in mind what model you're going to be putting on this base. Now, for this particular base, I'm going to be putting one on that has quite small feet. So I know I just need a little clear space around here for it. So I am relatively happy with that. I might just make this bit shorter. There we go. Yeah, that's better. So I'm going to take my super glue again and put some on the bits that I want to go onto the base. So the only problem with gel super glue it does what it wants, and it never wants to come out when you want it to. There we go. So we'll put some there. And there. And then trying not to get this stuck to my fingers, we'll put that down on there like that. And just hold it for a few seconds to let it grip. And then that should stick nicely. So, the next little touch is that I have some teeny tiny little twigs. Again, I've just found in the garden and I've let them dry out. So I'm just going to break some of these into little pieces. So we've got some little rough pieces there. And then we're also going to add some of this. Now, this is, you've probably seen me use this in other videos, but this is dried, sieved coconut fibre. When you buy coconut fibre, it has a lot of these big stringy root pieces in it, which is great for some effects. But I find that if you're going to put this on and try and paint over it, which we are, it's a lot better to sieve it first, because otherwise all of these stringy bits just get caught in your paintbrushes and they can cause a bit of a mess. And they sometimes kind of pull off as you're dry brushing and painting. So I find that the sieved stuff works a lot better for just adding texture without causing issues. So they're nicely dried. So I'm going to grab some scatter glue. Now you can just use PVA glue if you want. I've just gone for this scatter glue. So I'm going to put some of this on a paper palette. And then I'm going to take an old brush and mix in a little bit of water just to thin the glue down a little bit. We want kind of a paper mache consistency of the glue. So quite watery rather than thick, because otherwise it can look a bit goopy and just not quite right when it's dried. So now we've got our nice watery glue. Just going to start dabbing it on in random places. There's no pattern or rhyme or reason to this. We're just literally dabbing it on. Because at the moment, this isn't about aesthetics. It's not about how it looks as such. It's just about creating random textures. So we've put the glue there. So we're going to take a couple of bits of these little twigs and just put those on. Let's see if I can get a better angle for you. And then let's take one and put it there. And another little bit more glue. So put some glue in there. And another tiny bit of twig in there. So we've got some extra debris. And then we're going to take some of this. We're just going to sprinkle it gently around where we've added the glue. So we've got this nice ground covering. And then once you're happy that you've got that where you want it, you do your Taylor Swift and shake it off. And there we go. So this is now ready for priming. So I'm going to leave this to dry for a good few hours, just to make sure that all of this base material is stuck. If you're worried about it, if you're not sure how well it's stuck, a little tip here is to get some PVA glue and water in a spray bottle. Mix it about 50-50, so you've got a nice watery material, substance, and then just spray it over the areas where you've put the ground cover, and leave that to dry, and that should harden it all off and keep it all secure. So I will come back when this is nicely primed. I've primed this in black because I wanted black to be the starting point for this charred earth. As you can see, the way it's gathered on the tufts there has given quite a nice effect. So the first thing we're going to do is just to bring the tone down a little bit to more of a grey charred colour, and we're going to do some dry brushing. We're going to do this in 2 stages. So the first stage is going to be Skavenblight Dinge, and the second stage is going to be a lighter Dawnstone. So now I'm only going to be using a small dry brush for this, because with everything stuck on the base the way it is, you have to be quite careful with your dry brushing. Because the first time I tried to make this base, I went a little bit heavy with the dry brushing and started pulling away a lot of this ground texture. So I'm just using quite a small, soft dry brush, and I've got my Skavenblight Dinge on there, and all I'm going to do is start lightly going over everywhere. I really need to get a new camera set up. I apologise. It's like watching a Blair Witch version of a painting tutorial. So we're going to put this over everything, including our tufts. Just catching the edges there. All over the ground, all over this tree branch here. So you can probably see that this is, again, it's a very subtle effect. Just to make it look a little bit more charred. And once you've covered everywhere, we can move on to the Dawnstone. So again, being quite careful and being quite light. Just gonna work this into my bristles. And then start doing it again. And hopefully you can see here how that's starting to make some of those details pop and give it that look that we're going for. Again onto the tufts. There we go. So now we've got this charred look. What we want to do is create some hot spots, some areas that are still smouldering. And for that, we're going to be stippling. Now, I found that the best way to stipple is to actually get a specific stippling brush. And at first glance, it kind of looks a bit like a dry brush, but let me show you a comparison. So this is my dry brush that I've just been using. You can see here that these bristles are quite soft and flexible. Now, a stippling brush, on the other hand, these bristles are very solid and they've got a nice straight edge there. So I would recommend using an actual stippling brush for this so that you get the right look from the paint. So we're going to start with some Citadel Wazdaka Red. And I'm just going to put a little bit in my palette. And then we're going to be moving down to Trollslayer Orange. I'm going to put some of that in as well. Then on to Flash Gitz Yellow. And then finally onto some white scar to really pick out the hottest parts that are smouldering. So we've got all that in our palette. Now onto the stippling. So I'm going to start with the red, and I'm just going to take my stipple brush and just dab it straight down into the paint. And then, a little bit like dry brushing, I'm going to dab it onto the paper. And you can see here that rather than brushing it and rubbing it and wiping it all off, I'm doing this downward motion. So this is where the original paint came off the brush, but this is now the effect I'm going to get from what's left on the brush. So I'm going to take the base and I'm going to start finding some areas that I think would still be warm. I'm just going to lightly dab this on. And then when it starts fading, I'm going to do the same again. So let's go around to this side. And we're just dabbing this on. I think we'll have some here. And then just some little patches on the ground as well, and on these little branches that I've glued on. And then, without adding any extra paint to the brush, I'm just going to lightly drag the stipple brush across the top of the tufts like that, just to get that red effect on the very tips. And you can do as much or as little of this as you want. So let's put a little bit on here and right here on the end of that one. And let's put some on the top. Just being very careful as you're doing this not to dislodge any of the parts that you've stuck to the base, because some of it might be a little bit fragile. So there we go. Now, without using any water, so we're not going to wash our brush, we're just going to wipe off the excess from the stipple brush onto our tissue paper. Get rid of as much of it as we can. Then we're going to go into the orange paint. And we're going to do exactly the same. So I'm dabbing this on to get rid of it until I see the nice pattern that I want. And then I'm going to go back over the areas that had the red on and just add these little bits of orange. And add a little bit to the ground, a little bit there, wipe it down over the tufts, and then onto these bits where we put the red. And if it starts to look like it's not doing much, you just go back into your paint and do the same again. And just dab that on. Put some around here. Turn it round. Add some more down here. And let's put a little bit on here as well. Now, you don't have to be too careful and neat with this. It's not like once you've put the red on, you then have to make sure that all the orange is in exactly the middle of all the red bits. It's going to be looked at from a distance anyway. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. We're just trying to create that illusion of smouldering. So again, I'm wiping off my brush. Let's get rid of the worst of it. And then we're going to go back in for the yellow. And again, doing exactly the same thing. Dabbing the brush off. And then just going on in little bits onto these hot spots. Just adding tiny little flecks of yellow. Again on here, a few tiny bits, just bringing out the edges. Wherever you think would still be hot. And then finally, we're going to go back in with a tiny bit of the white. So I'm going to put my stipple brush in there. Now with the white, you want to try and get even more of it off your brush than you did with the other colours. Just because you don't want the white to be too overwhelming. So if I just tap on there, you can hopefully see that that just adds these extra little hot spots. And we'll go over the tips of the tufts. Now you probably noticed I didn't put any yellow in the tufts. I've just went the red, the orange and the white. And that's purely personal taste. I just prefer it. I prefer the way it looks. Put some white in there. And on there. And that is pretty much done. Now it's just a question of letting this dry for a few minutes and then having another look at it and seeing if there's anywhere else you think might benefit from some smouldering or anywhere you think you might have overdone it. But it's very much a personal choice. For me, that's done. That's ready. I'm quite happy with that. So, all that's left to do is give the rim a quick paint. And there you have it. A charred woodland base. So that's it. That's how I make my scorched woodland bases. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the little bell icon, and that way you'll be notified whenever I release new content. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram under Debsworth's Hobby Studio, so give me a follow on there and you'll get to see everything else that I'm up to and what might be coming up in the future. And I'll be back on Wednesday with another Back to Basics video where I'm going to be talking about how to make simple ice bases. So until then, happy hobbying.